Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and last recording. Chapter 18, You Raised Me. We have reached a very emotional passage of the Du'a. Give to me out of your grace, O my Master. I am the young one that you have brought up. I am the ignorant one that you have taught. I am the straying one that you have guided. I am the humble one that you have lifted up. I am the scared one that you have given security. I am the poor one that you have given affluence. I am the weak one that you have strengthened. I am the ill one that you have cured. I am the sinner that you have covered. I am the guilty one that you have excused. I am the small one that you have expanded. I am the helpless one that you have backed. Previously, Imam Javad taught us to have hope in God. We spoke about the best prescription for growth, being aware of our shortcomings and, at the same time, having hope that with God, nothing is impossible. In this passage, Imam Javad elaborates on this idea. Imam Sajjad's autobiography. In this passage of the Dua, Imam Sajjad is in effect sharing his biography. However, the way he does it is very different to the biographies we're used to. It starts like this. I am the little one that you have brought up. Describing his early years, what Imam Sajjad considers important is that God was the one who took care of him. To him, it does not matter which town he grew up in, what the name of the neighborhood was, or what time of year he was born. What matters to Imam Sajjad is that God brought him to this world out of love and then helped him grow. When Imam Sajjad reflects on his childhood, what he sees is the hand of God that was with him every step of the way, in all aspects of life. I am the ignorant one that you have taught. When it comes to knowledge, Imam admits that he has no knowledge other than what God has given him. In fact, no one other than God has any knowledge. God is the only source. As we discussed in early chapters, whether knowledge comes to us through a book, a teacher, or directly into our hearts, God is the one who is giving it to us. The book or teacher are just channels through which God has chosen to send his gift to us. When Imam Sajjad looks at his journey of knowledge, all he sees is that God was the one who taught him. Whether he learned something from his father, Imam Hussain a.s, or whether he received inspiration directly into his heart, he sees both as God teaching him. This is pure Tawḥīd. There are many who may write books on Tawḥīd or even give lectures on it. They can describe so beautifully that God is the source of all good. But when they look back at their lives, perhaps they only see their own hard work. If someone admires their books or lectures, internally they feel happy that their hard work has paid off. To them, it was their efforts to go to the library, to go to university, and to study hard that gave them this knowledge. This is a surefire sign that this individual has still not managed to find Tawḥīd in his own life. This is very different to Imam Sajjad. If someone admired his teachings, he would say, all praise is due to God. He gave it to me. If he spent his nights reflecting and worshipping, he saw it as God's blessings that enabled him to stay up, not his own asceticism. This is why Imam Sajjad speaks about Tawḥīd. It has a stronger impact on our hearts. Behind his words, there is the real light of Tawḥīd. Tawḥīd. We said previously that this is the real knowledge that can change our lives. Knowledge is not what we have memorized in our minds. Knowledge is that light in our hearts that enables us to look at our lives and see God's hand. Imam Sadiq says, true knowledge is a light that Allah instills in the heart. It enables us to look at the nights we spent studying and see that it was in fact God who helped us do it. Otherwise, we have also had many days in which no matter what we did, we could not motivate ourselves to work. Even something like motivation is not in our hands, although we might think otherwise until we lose it. His motivation to learn, ability to understand, a father who could teach him, Imam Sajjad sees all of these as God's blessings. Imam is now trying to help us to see our lives in a similar way, and to realize that had it not been for God's grace, we could never have found our way. The Quran says, if it were not for God's bounty and mercy towards you, not one of you would have ever attained purity. Quran chapter 24, verse 21. Imam Sajjad testifies to the truth of this verse in his own life. I am the lost one that you have guided. The reason true Tawḥīd is difficult for many to accept is that we have been submerged in God's blessings for so long that we begin to feel that they actually belong to us. We thought the sharpness of our brains belonged to us. We thought that the strength in our knees belonged to us. We only realized that these things were not ours when we lost them, either temporarily or for good. A clear example from my own life was when I fractured my knee in a game of football. I only realized later, after a hospital visit and some tests, that I fractured my knee. It was innocuous. I had raised my leg into the air to kick the ball, twisted my knee, and fell. And just like that, I could not get up anymore. I willed the act of getting up, but my will no longer had any impact. For 30 years, whenever I had willed my body to get up, it would obey, but now, for the first time, it did not. That is when I realized that even for those 30 years, it was not I who wielded any control, but God. Because He allowed me to get up when I willed every single time, I thought the power was mine. Now I realize that if the power was truly mine, then why could I no longer do it? There is no will, no strength, unless from God. This is only one example. Each of us have many similar stories in our lives. Perhaps we think the patience we maintain in difficult situations is from us, until one day we're stuck in traffic, lose our temper, and start shouting. All it needs is one moment of reflection to realize Tawḥīd. All you need to see is if you can make yourself patient in that moment. And your patience is not but through Allah. Quran chapter 16 verse 127. Perhaps when you are taking care of a family member who is ill, and out of tiredness you realize that your love for them is slowly turning to resentment. In that moment, try to keep your love for them. Why is it so hard? Because we are not the true source of love. Every single time we show love to others, we were redirecting God's love. We only realize it was not ours in those moments where circumstances temporarily show us our real treasury and we see it is empty. God says in the Quran, "For there is not a thing but with us are its treasuries." Quran chapter 15 verse 21. In this life, we are using God's qualities, spending from His account. We show love to those around us using God's love. We learn using God's knowledge. We grow using God's guidance. We get up and walk using God's strength. Imam says, "It is not enough to simply hear this, rather, we have to see it in our lives." That is when a person becomes drunk on God's love. The moment we realize that everything we appreciate about ourselves, about life, is only possible because God enabled us to live using His resources, we realize how much He loves us. "I am the poor one to whom you have given affluence." In Du'a Abu Hamza, Imam Hussain says that God loved us even before we were born. He brought us to this world, bestowed us with an intellect to understand with, and a heart to love with. He filled our hearts with love so we could start to love others. Once we realize all of these were gifts from God, we understand Imam Sa's phrase, "I am the humble one that you have lifted up." Any status we might have in the eyes of the people, any position we might occupy in the hearts of others, was because of the good qualities God placed in us. Look at the raw honesty in Imam Sa's words. It is truly inspiring. May these lines become more than words to us and help us to see the world and our lives the way He did. May we become able to look at the moments we had courage in our hearts and see that it was God who made us feel safe. "I am the scared one that you have given security to." Or the moments that we were strong in the face of a challenge. "I am the weak one that you have strengthened. I am the helpless one that you have backed." Or the moments that we needed healing and you obliged. "I am the ill one that you have healed." Imam takes the lens of Tawḥīd and directs it at every aspect of Insan's life, sharing with us what he sees. He says that wherever in my life he looks, all he sees is God's goodness. We had gaps and God filled them for us. We needed knowledge and He taught us. We needed healing and He healed us. We needed strength and He invigorated us. We did not even exist and He created us. In other words, all we had were our needs. God had all the good in the world and He shared it with us. Whatever good things you possess come from God. Quran chapter 16 verse 53. In one final sentence, Imam summarizes his biography, which, if we think about it, is really the biography of every single creation. "I'm the small one that you expanded." Just like a gardener who plants a seed in a garden and looks after it until it blossoms into a beautiful flower, God planted us in this world and carefully looked after us until we grew and blossomed into the beautiful human beings that we always had the potential to become. This is Tawḥīd. When the flower realizes that it was the gardener who planted its seed in the garden, watered it until it grew, protected it, and placed it under the sun. It was the gardener who was solely responsible for its growth. Without the gardener, the flower would never have existed. Our gardener is God. The two benefits of Tawḥīd. 1. Rejoicing in Tawḥīd. When we finally realize the love and care that God has shown us, our hearts become filled with joy. Everything good you find in yourself becomes a reminder that God loved you so much and gave you this beauty. If you see knowledge in yourself, it reminds you that you are special to Him. He shared His knowledge with you. In other words, every good quality in you becomes like a love letter from God. You may be wondering about your bad qualities. This is a very good question and takes us into the second benefit. 2. Prescription for growth. Imam Javad says that our bad qualities are opportunities to go to God and ask for more love. Give to me out of your grace, O my Master. Do not worry if you look at your life and feel that you do not have enough. Do not allow this to make you feel inadequate or unworthy. There is so much waiting for you with God. Just take whatever needs you have to God and let Him grant you the solutions. If you feel you're not strong enough, if you're scared or lost, if you feel no one showed you how to love, wherever it is, don't worry. Just go to God and ask Him for whatever you want. He will give you courage, direction, love, and much more. It does not matter what has happened in your past. When you go to God, He will give you so much that you will be fine. The moment we believe this promise of Imam Javad that God is attentive to us at all times and welcomes us with His grace, our hearts will be filled with peace and joy. Life will be forever different. The great news. An important point in this phrase of the dua is that Imam says, God gives us out of His grace. Give to me out of your grace. Before we start thinking that we do not deserve God's gifts, or that we have not done enough good deeds to receive so much from God, Imam Javad stops us and reminds us that it has nothing to do with our actions and everything to do with God's grace and generosity. Do not worry about what you have done. God gives us out of His grace, and God's grace is infinite. God's grace is great indeed. Quran chapter 3 verse 174. There is a very powerful verse in the Quran that my teacher brought to my attention. He told me that the first time he read it, he could not believe his eyes. His heart was filled with joy, and he immediately shared it with a friend of his who felt much the same way. Many years have passed since that moment, but when he talks about it, you can still hear the excitement in his voice. Even the way the verse is presented in the Quran is very special. Have you seen that when an important politician travels, he has a motorcade with 4 riders, cars which travel ahead of his vehicle? This is how God treats this verse. He sends an entourage of other verses ahead to lay the groundwork. First, He says, "It is to God that everything in the heavens and the earth truly belongs." God's promise is true, but most people do not realize it. Quran chapter 10 verse 56. Then, O mankind, there has come to you instruction from your Lord, healing for what is in the hearts and a guidance and mercy for the believers. Quran chapter 10 verse 57. The God to whom everything belongs and whose promises are true is now telling us that He is going to send us a teaching that will heal our hearts and be a guidance and mercy for us. Do you see how God is building the anticipation and emphasizing that what He is about to share is very important? Now, are you ready to hear this powerful teaching that can heal our hearts? Inshallah, in the next volume of the book, we will discuss it. I am only joking. He says, "Say, in God's grace and mercy, let them rejoice. These are better than all they accumulate." Quran chapter 10 verse 58. He says that relying on His grace and mercy is the answer to all of our problems and pains. It is the light we need in our lives. If you had any doubt about this message, God says that He is the owner of the heavens and the earth, whose promises are always true, is guaranteeing the truth of the statement. This may be amongst the most unique verses of the Quran in the way that God builds up to it. God says that all you need to overcome your pain and suffering is to rely on God's mercy, rather than trying to fix your problems yourself. Instead of protecting yourself with your limited resources, the Creator of the universe, with all His greatness, will be the one protecting you. This is not a medicine that you have to take for years until you see its impact. Rather, the moment you take this medicine, it will heal your heart. The moment you feel God's support for you, all your worry, pain, grief, and fears will leave. A lot of us may still not feel this way. We may not yet have felt God's support for us. Let me explain with an example. Imagine it is your birthday and you're excited to celebrate with everyone. However, you do not receive any messages during the day. At first, you think that the messages will come later, but as the day goes on, you worry that people may have forgotten. Work finishes and you return home. You see there are no flowers, presents, or decorations. You become certain that your loved ones have forgotten your birthday and do not care about you. Suddenly, a voice calls you to the kitchen. You enter the room and you hear everyone shout, "Surprise!" You see they have got you flowers and beautiful gifts and arranged a whole party. The whole day you imagine that no one cared about you, whilst they were immersed in planning and thinking of ways to demonstrate their love for you. When did you realize their love? Only when you went to the kitchen and saw it. We are the same. God is showing us so much love to us and taking constant care for us, but we will not be happy unless we see it. All the moments where we lapse into despair, thinking that God does not love us, or that we are not worthy to anyone, God is there as a constant, preparing gifts for us from His grace. He has so much love for us. If only we knew how much He loves us and how much He was ready to give us, we would be so happy that all the pain in our hearts would fade away. This is not an empty promise. This is the promise of the Creator of all mankind. This is the most important piece of information you need in your life, and your soul can attest to its truth. I repeat, all we need to get rid of all of our worries, pains, and fear is to feel God's love and His willingness to bestow His gifts upon us. You may have noticed that in the example, you did not know about love until you went to the kitchen. How do we feel God's love? Where is the kitchen that we can go in order to feel His love for us? Imam replies that our needs are themselves the starting point. From now on, whenever you feel weak or scared, or in need of knowledge, or indeed anything else, instead of trying to fix your problems yourself, rely on God instead and say, "Give to me out of your grace, O my Master." As God said in the Quran, this is better than anything we may accumulate in our lives. Pray, but do not rely on your prayer. Give charity, but do not rely on your charity. Read books, but do not rely on the books you read. Only rely on God's grace and just see how your life changes. This is not an empty promise. Chapter summary. We often take the blessings we have for granted, believing that they belong to us. However, everything we have is from God's resources. Imam encourages us to see that we are using God's qualities, love, knowledge, guidance, and strength to live. When we realize that everything we have is coming from God, we also realize the fastest way to gain the things we lack. Imam says all we need to do is ask for these things from God's grace. Chapter 19. The U-Turn. We have reached the final station in our journey exploring Du'a Abu Hamza Thumali. The last passage we will discuss is one that summarizes the whole dua in a few lines. Take me to the stage of return towards you. Help me weep for myself, for I have wasted my life chasing my low dreams, whilst postponing my search for my ultimate yearning. I have come to the point whereby I no longer have hope in any good coming from myself. Imam speaks of the stage of return towards God. Even without delving too deep into the passage, it is clear that there is a point that people reach in their spiritual journeys when they finally turn wholeheartedly to God. You may have experienced it. You are driving and suddenly realize you're going in the wrong direction. You make a U-turn to head in the complete opposite direction. The same happens in life too. In the beginning, we think that this world can be heaven for us if we work hard, and that if things work out, then everything will be great. Then we slowly realize that whatever we get in this world is not enough for us. And no matter how hard we try, there are things about ourselves that we cannot fix. For many years, we might keep avoiding this truth. Eventually, a point will come in our spiritual journey where we realize that what we wanted cannot be found here. We make a U-turn and return to God. This is a stage where it dawns on us that the world, as great as it is, no longer feels enough. This is the moment we begin to yearn for something much greater, and the only thing satisfying our souls is God. People arrive at this stage in different ways. For some, it can happen out of love. They start seeing God's love for them and fall in love with Him so much that nothing short of a reunion with Him satisfies them. Some arrive at this destination through difficulties. For example, they lose a loved one and suddenly everything they were chasing in this world loses its significance for them. It becomes meaningless for them to care about their investment return when, for example, a family member they loved is no longer allowed to share their good fortune with. For others, it might come through the path of self-knowledge. The more they reflect on their soul, the more they realize that it is more precious than anything else they can find in this world. And so, instead of using the moments of their life to chase gains here, they start yearning for a gain truly worthy of their soul. Now, people do not all arrive at this stage at the same time. Some reach there in their childhood. Some get there in middle age. There are some who do not reach before their death and have to continue the journey in the next realms. Imam Sajjad al-Islam is teaching us that we do not need to wait for something to happen for us to wake up and reach this stage. We can get there much faster, and this is possible through asking God. Take me to the stage of return towards you. Imam al-Islam is teaching us to ask God to show His beauty to us so that we realize what we are missing out on. The reason we have been happy with the dunya for years is that the ceiling of our fantasies and dreams is very low. For many of us who have not tasted the pleasure and joy of feeling God's presence, we have very low expectations of life, ones that this world can easily satisfy. Imam Sajjad al-Islam is now telling you to ask God to show Himself to you. Suddenly, everything else will lose its greatness in your eyes. You will realize you had not ever known true pleasure. Then, the Imam al-Islam says, "Help me weep for myself." This seems a strange line until we realize this is not referring to crying in a negative sense. It is a blessing. Sometimes, when our inner feelings reach their peak, those feelings turn into tears. Yes, when we are sad we cry, but sometimes when we are overcome by joy, we also cry. Which feeling is Imam Sajjad al-Islam alluding to in this phrase, when he asks God to help him cry? It is that feeling of yearning for something bigger than this world. Imam al-Islam is asking God to help him reach this pinnacle because that is when our soul finally gives up on this world and realizes that what it wants cannot be achieved here. And even spending one day of life chasing this dunya is a waste of precious time. I have wasted my life chasing low dreams whilst postponing my search for my ultimate yearning. This is where we are no longer enchanted by the charms of this world. We realize that what our soul yearns for is much bigger than the whole world. It is as if our soul hits the glass ceiling of this world, and we realize that this can never be our true home. We have only come here temporarily to witness before we go back home. There is a beautiful conversation between Imam Sajjad al-Islam's father, Imam Hussain al-Islam, and his aunt, Lady Zainab al-Islam, on the day of Ashura. Most readers will be familiar with what happened on that day. Imam Hussain al-Islam and his family were attacked in the middle of the desert on their way to the city of Kufa. This conversation is at the moment when the fate of Imam Hussain al-Islam is certain, and Lady Zainab al-Islam knows that this is their last conversation. Obviously, it is a painful moment. At this point, Imam Hussain al-Islam shares a few poignant words with her. He said, "My grandfather, the messenger of God, was better than all of us and he left this world. My father Ali was better than us. He too left this world. Our mother Fatima left as well. My brother Hassan also left this world. I too am going to leave it soon, and your day to leave it will come too." How simply and yet how beautifully he told the story of this world. He meant that insan needs to know this world is not our home. It was only ever a station we visited. If we think for even a moment that we should stay in this world, we have hurt ourselves. We have turned our lives into moments of sadness, fear, and darkness. Why do people steal? Why do they betray each other? Why do they lie and hurt one another? They imagine that they are going to stay here and therefore they have to gain here no matter what. If their heart accepted that everyone before them has left and they too will leave one day, they will not do any of these things. They need to realize that what their heart desires cannot be achieved in this world. I have come to the point where I no longer have hope in any good coming from myself. After a lifetime of religiosity, practice, worship, and trying to grow, I have reached the level that I no longer have any hope that any good can come from me. I have given up on my own efforts. This is a very profound idea and incredibly high level to reach. Do you remember the verse that we discussed in the last chapter where God gave us important news? Say, "In God's grace and mercy let them rejoice. These are better than all they accumulate." Quran chapter 10 verse 58. In this verse, God informed us that relying on His grace is much better than relying on anything we could accumulate, even if that was our good deeds or worship. This is the level Imam Sajjad al-Islam is talking about in this phrase. It does not mean that he is no longer worshipping. He was, after all, the pioneer of all worshippers. Rather, he says that he no longer has any hope in any good coming from what he does. He wants to rely solely on God's grace in order to get to him. He no longer wants to be the main character in his spiritual journey. He wants God to be the hero of the story. He does not want to go towards God. He wants God to take him by the hand and guide him towards himself. Words cannot describe how important this point is. Most of us will only realize the worth of this teaching of Imam Sajjad after decades of looking for healing and growth. Only after spending years of overcoming issues like insecurity, jealousy, or anger and realizing how difficult it is will we reach the stage. We manage to remain calm for a few months and begin to think that we have reached inner peace, only to suddenly lose it after a short while. We try to show love to everyone and perhaps succeed for a time, and then suddenly something happens and the rage within us comes pouring out. We work on our courage until we feel so strong in the face of adversities, but one day some small bad news fills our body with fear. We defeat our temptations for a long time, but then suddenly fall back into them. The first few times when we just get up, shake it off, and try again, but after many times of the same pattern repeating, it is time to learn that we need God's support. The sooner we accept this, the less time we waste and the less pressure we put on ourselves. One thing that can help us realize this sooner is just how much we need to achieve. The aim is not just to overcome a few bad qualities, feel inner peace, or experience different states of consciousness. No, as great as all of these are still the most basic early stages. Having inner peace is great, but then what? Our aim is nothing short of a union with God, such that we feel His presence in every moment of our lives. Imam Sajjad says that to reach such a high goal, he has nothing to rely on. In another dua, part of what are popularly known as the 15 whisper prayers, Imam Sajjad summarizes this so beautifully. God, how narrow are the paths for the one who goes on their journey without you as a guide. How clear is the truth for the one who is taken forward on their path by you. The path of the Prophet and Imam is very fast. If you ever feel like the route is too long, know that you're on a different track. These du'as from the Ahlul Bayt contain the secrets of the spiritual path. If you go on this journey alone, it will be difficult and narrow. But if you allow God to take you, you will arrive in no time. This process is so fast that you reach the peak of purity only moments after being in the depths of darkness. 1 second you are struggling with the darkness of a sin, the next you are united with God. This is the journey of a person who believes in a loving and powerful God. Think about it. If we imagine that we need to repent and cry for hours, as we are sometimes told to do, in order for God to forgive our sins, what does that say about God? Either He does not love us enough to forgive us, or He does not have the power to forgive us. There are some people who are still stuck on a sin they committed 20 years ago, whilst God can take us out of the darkness in a split second. All we need to do is rely on God. Imam Sajjad says, I only depend and rely on you. I put all my hope and trust in you, and I hold on to your mercy. This one prescription is a summary of the whole book. Hold on to God's mercy and rely on Him. This is the fastest way to progress from the depths of darkness to the peaks of light. We do not have to rely on ourselves. In fact, we do not possess anything to rely on. All good comes from God, and He is willing to give it to us out of His love. Imam Sajjad says, O my Master, I am asking you for things that I do not deserve. I pray to you, O Lord, for all goodness, be it known or unknown to me. Once we lose hope in getting anywhere on our own and start to rely on God instead, there is no limit to the heights that God can take us to. Imam al-Islam says that we can ask God for any and all goodness that exists in the universe. When we rely on Him, we can even ask for those levels reserved for the highest and most spiritual people. I ask you, O Allah, for the goodness that your righteous servants have besought from. If you are wondering, on what basis? How can I just ask for these things? Or, what gives me the hope that I will reach any of these? Imam Sajjad replies, O my God, it is certainly your benevolence that has given me hope. If our wishes and requests are small and we feel too embarrassed or scared to ask for great levels of spirituality, it means we have still not realized how generous God is. Imam Sajjad is teaching us that God is so generous that whatever growth or spiritual gains we hope for from Him are possible. Of course, the highest of them is God Himself. God is the ultimate desire of our heart and soul. Oh, my ultimate yearning. It is only once we feel God's presence with us that our hearts will finally find peace, as the Imam says, "O my Master, only through remembering you has my heart come alive." What a powerful line. In other words, a life without God's presence is not really a life. Is there any surprise then that humanity en masse feels so miserable? We are all deprived of what is equivalent of breath for our soul. Elsewhere, in another dua, Imam addresses God saying, "You alone are my desire. My waking and sleep belong to you. Joining you is a yearning of my soul, and my passion is to love you. I yearn to see you, and my ultimate wish is to be near you. Speaking to you comforts my soul, and you alone hold the cure for my illness, the quench for my thirst, the solace for my ardor, and the end of my distress." God is the solution to all of our problems. If the modern human is going through so much angst and fear, it is because we are not feeling the connection to our loving Creator. Only through intimate conversations with you have I cooled the pain of my fear. If you're reading these lines and you really wish you had this connection but do not yet feel like you do, that is totally fine and natural. That is why we are reading this dua, to learn how to get there. If there is one thing we have learned from Imam in this dua, it is that anything we want, we should ask God for. Do not think the way to reach God is just through more actions. Just open up your heart and say, "O Allah, I ask you to fill my heart with love for you and eagerness towards you." This is the main teaching of Imam Islam. Rely on God for everything you want. Whatever needs you have in the depths of your soul, take them to God and ask Him to fulfill them. It could be things as magnificent as a desire for God's love, or even much simpler things. "O Allah, I seek your protection against laziness, failure, grief, cowardice, and stinginess." Whatever bad qualities you find in yourself, ask God to remove them. He has many ways of doing this. He may take those qualities directly out of your heart, or maybe send a book your way that has the exact solution, or introduce a person to your life who can inspire you. There will be many ways, but God is a supervisor. The main thing to remember is that we cannot overcome our shortcomings on our own. We need His help to overcome ourselves. Help me against myself. This is the fastest and safest way of spirituality. This is the teachings of the prophets and Imams throughout history. This is the way that God intended for humans to grow. This is the way that saves you to the troubles of trial and error. This is the way that liberates you from learning through punishment and reward. This is the way that guarantees success where other paths fail, and gives you success without inflating your ego. In this path, God is the hero, not us. We do not become enlightened or spiritual. We do not win God. We do not go from darkness to light. God does all of these and more for us. He is the source of all good. This, my friends, is the path of Tawḥīd. If we want to join, all we need to do is be honest with God about our shortcomings. Acknowledge that all good belongs to Him, and all we have are our needs. We take our needs to Him and ask Him to meet them for us. Let's approach God with honesty and truth and tell Him, "God, do not leave us alone. With you, we are stronger than a mountain. Without you, we fear even shadows. With you, we are the most loving. Without you, we hurt even our loved ones. With you, our presence brings joy and comfort to people around us. Without you, we hurt even ourselves. With you, we inspire others with our beauty, patience, and faith. Without you, we do things we're ashamed of." When we feel God's presence, love, and support, everyone benefits. We grow, but we will also become a better companion to our friends, a better member of our family, a better partner for our spouses, and a beacon of hope and light for this world. So, let's join together and draw to an end this journey of exploring a smart part of the ocean that is Du'a Abu Hamza, by echoing a line of prayer taught to us by the best teacher in history, the mercy of God for humanity, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. God, do not leave me to myself, even for the duration of an eye's blink. Book summary. Live with God and rely on Him for everything. Let God be the hero of your story and hold tightly to your hope in Him.